Don't let anyone despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Those were the words that Paul spoke to a young minister, Timothy, in 1 Timothy 4, in verse number 12. And in light of verses 1 through 5, there was a great need for sound doctrine to be preached. There was a great need for the gospel to have been preached. But it seems to me that based on verse number 12 and Paul's counsel, Timothy's command to preach the gospel was being undermined by the fact that he was a young man. And I think what I take from this verse, first of all, I start with Jesus. What made Jesus a tremendous teacher was not the fact that he just spoke awesome things, but that he lived an awesome life. In other words, his words described what his life would look like, and then his life illustrated what his words were saying. And so Paul says to Timothy, I think the same thing. Hey, they're undermining you because you're young. But don't let them do that. Show them by your life how awesome Jesus is. Now, in some ways, as a young minister, I can relate to Timothy because in the past, some have looked down on me, probably for the same ways that they've looked down on Timothy. And if you're a young minister, then you definitely know how I feel. Or if you're a wife to a young minister, then you know how he feels because it happens whether or not we want to admit it. I'm sure some people were jealous of Timothy, maybe because a young man had been elevated to a place of leadership or a really high position or something like that, and so they were jealous. Some may have been disrespectful toward Timothy because they just looked down and said, hey, sometimes the older people find it hard or difficult to accept that younger people have been put in these positions. Some criticized Timothy, I'm sure, because even though Timothy was a young man, I'm sure he did things that probably reflected his generation. And so the older people criticized him for it. Or maybe they were just distrusting of Timothy. They said, he's a young man. We can't trust him. Or maybe they had these misconceptions in their mind that said, hey, Timothy doesn't have a master's degree. He hadn't been preaching for 10 years. He doesn't have 10 years pulpit experience. He's never raised kids. He's never lost a parent. He hadn't been married for 10 years. Timothy doesn't know anything. Why are we letting him do the preaching? Paul says, hey, Timothy, don't worry about them. Don't let anyone put you down because you're young, but be an example in speech. In other words, Timothy, when you're tempted to say what you want and defend yourself because you're young, don't do it. Show them Jesus in the way that you speak. Do it in the way that you live. Don't wait till later to start praying, or don't wait till later to start doing right. Do it now. Pray now. Be generous now. Show them Jesus right now. Mom used to say to us when we were kids, maturity isn't always equal to knowledge. Ty, it's about how you live. Paul said, Timothy, it's about how you live. Do you show love to your enemies and to your neighbors? Do you show them purity and faith by the life that you live? The cities that Timothy was preaching in were hard. They were hard places. But Paul says, don't let them put you down because you're young, Timothy. You know, I think people will be a lot less likely to despise our youth if they admire our example. I think that's Christian leadership in a nutshell. It's not demanding, it's not being a boss, it's not being a dictator or giving threats. It's revolutionizing the leadership world by the example that we set. That's what Jesus did. And so Paul's advice to Timothy is none other than be like Jesus. Revolutionize the world with the gospel, Timothy, and don't let them undermine your youth. Be an example. Show them Jesus in the way that you talk, and in the way that you live, and in the way that you pursue a radical life of faith in Christ Jesus.